Now, starting with the setup, right, we have two pieces of framing. We think what super teams are defined as. The super teams like A have more support given from their fans, from the league, whatever, things like this, have the from the sports program as a whole. And B, we think sports super teams are likely to always win for two reasons. First, they have better quality, and second, they are much better supported by people. So under this, we characterize two worlds under the status quo. One world is when super teams are existing. So this means that super teams always win in matches, and super teams always get more support from fans and from the league. The other world is where super teams are not happening. Thus, we think that world is much better because there are less harms created than the good that our opponents might raise. Moving on to our major contentions. Our first contention is on how there will be limited opportunity. We think most players will lose opportunity in such a scenario where there's super teams. So two reasons. First, super players have more support from the league and they have higher skills and more financial support of fans, making them a large difference between them and normal players. This means that many players will give up the opportunity to go so because they think even if they do it, they will still be outweighed by the super players. Second, these super players are more likely to be higher quality players because they have better skills, and even if they lose, they still have a better reputation because people support them because people think that they are generally better and they're relatively better than the other players. Thus, the impact is huge. There will be less opportunities for other players, for new players, which means there will be less new players because they have no way whatsoever to just come and have a match and beat these super players. Thus, we think because of this, less new players come into the industry, come into doing sports and have less opportunities destroying the industry as a whole. Second, our second contention is on fairness. We think super teams reduces the significance of individual matches and lowers the overall quality of matches. Sports are at best when matches are meaningful, when the competition is fair. But super teams, superstars mean the league always support them. So even if they lose, we think they will somehow win because the league wants them to have a good reputation, because the league wants them to look good in front of their fans because they're all superstars. And also, even if they lose, the fans still believe that their superstar is the best because they are the best players formed into one team. Thus, we think this is creating major inequality and major unfairness because all of these teams are going to be the best at all times. The impact is huge. Justice is required in everything, and only justice and fairness brings the meaning of a debate, the purpose of a match, right? Even if we like, let's take for example, we're doing debate topic, we still want justice, right? We still want fairness if we're doing such a match, such a competition, right? So thus we think without justice, without fairness, it's very harmful for such a match like sports. Moving on to our next contention is how there will be destroyed industries. So third contention has two subpoints. The first subpoint is sports programs. We think less people will come to watch games when generally more players, just the same group of people win over and over again, and less players join into it, and less players have better opportunities. Thus, there will only be these few superstars, fans who will actually come and watch the games. This means that sport platforms, sports programs, sports leagues, they lose money, they lose market because less people come and watch their matches, less people come and support their fans. There's only such a small amount of fans who support these small number of superstars, right? Someone B is on sports betting. We think betting companies or programs earn less money too, which comes back with an impact because the sports programs lose money. When there's always the winner that is the same winner, this means that sports betting companies will not be able to expand their industries because always at every time less people will bet on this, less people will gamble on this because there's always the same winner that wins. Thus, we think destroying two industries has a massive impact. The impact is large. Striking down industries means unemployment, means unemployed people, especially when sports betting industry is expanding over the world and sports programs also expanding on the world. Two examples. So in U.S., majority of states have legalized sports betting, and many companies and many leagues in the U.S. and in all around the world, like Australia, countries like Australia too, are expanding these such industries. When these industries are struck down, this means there's massive unemployment. There's even society breakdown on lower quality of life for the society and for many people in the society. We think this brings a massive impact as economic recession will happen, and thus the whole society would face a massive strike. The next content is on how it destroys the purpose. We think the spirit of sport would be gone if such a super team would exist. So two reasons. First, the spirit of a sport is to be fair and to have purposeful matches. When super teams always win, there's no spirit, there's no ideal of the match, and there's not such a match, there's such a meaning and to such a purpose to have a match in the first place. We think this destroys the whole purpose of having sport, the whole spirit of having sport will be gone. The second is on how loyalty of sports will be broken because super teams they have they destroy the fan support from individual members instead to teams, which destroys the unity. When these superstars come together to form a team, this means most of the individuals, most of the fans who are watching these matches will become a fan of the team and a fan of the individual members instead of such a team. So we think this impact is very large because then what comes to place is that these industries will be strike down, and furthermore will be broken down as the purpose of the loyalty and the spirit of sport will be gone. We think why is this important? The reason people come to matches and the reason people actually watch these matches is because the sport has purpose. It's because the sport has spirit. It's because the sport is fair. Thus, when all of these are stricken down, well, or when all of these are gone, we think that it's less likely for anyone to actually come and watch the sport or for anyone to actually play the sport. The impact of this is large as decreasing such impacts, such decreasing such an entertainment, such decreasing such an expanding market, such an industry as a whole, is bringing huge strikes to the current status quo. So what have we told you, Judge? First, we've told you that we think we characterize the two roles in the current status quo as one is where super teams gain all the support and when super teams always win. And then our four main contentions are A, there will be limited opportunity and lost opportunity in scenarios where super teams exist because new players will not be able to come in and new players will not be able to replace or actually get any opportunity to win a match because the super players A have higher quality, B have better skills, C have better support from the league, and D have better support from fans. The second contention is on fairness. We told you that this reduces the significance of individual matches and lowers overall quality of sports when sports are unfair because the super teams always win. Third, we have told you that multiple industries lose their market. Multiple industries will fail by being struck down as less people come to watch games. So this means sports programs and sports betting companies will lose their market. And our last contention tells you that there will be destroyed purpose, which means the spirit of sport, which is the basis of the reason why people will come to watch sports and why people participate in sports will be gone, which just makes sports a meaningless and not fulfill entertainment activity instead of the best case, the ideal model in this current status quo. And thus, we are never so proud to oppose. Thank you. Propose. Thank you.
Now, before I present our first two arguments, we will have the rebuttal. Now, the government's main point was how super teams always get to win, and this will lead to less opportunities for other players and cause monopolization, and will also lead to eventually low qualities for other teams. They also tried to explain how the industry will be ruined and how it will be affected economically worse because only a few fans are interested in superstars and there will be lower qualities for other teams while the superstars make less profit. But now, in fact, we have an incredibly different opinion on this because we believe that by using super teams, it might, in the short term, look like the super team is getting all the attention, but it provides more opportunities for all players as a whole because it will increase the attraction towards the industry as a whole, which we will also explain more in our arguments. Now, they talked about how the lower players will get less attention. But for players in general, the biggest danger is of their industry failing from a few spectators and them having no place to stand. But if these super teams attract more spectators through applying all these superstars, more fans will be interested and new fans will be included into the community and the industry will be revived and ultimately leading to more support for all players.
POI.
Yes.
Explain why this attention it gives you, if not losing attention, what is very likely, will lose those players that is not in the super team, or it is just going to be concentrated on the super.
Well, we believe, as we will explain in the argument, that this will not take away all the attention from the original players completely. Now, I will explain this in our arguments. But before we go on to our arguments, the government team also talked about how the spirits of sports will not be respected because there will be talented players in the super teams and they will win most of the tours that they go in. But they explained this as if this was an incredibly big point of unfairness. But we want to also explain that just because super teams win doesn't mean that they're really unfair. The sports industry fundamentally isn't welfare. Sports isn't necessarily an act of honing their abilities and sorting out the best players. That's one of the core meanings of sports. And so we believe that super teams, as we will also explain in our arguments, can be actually one of the best ways of upholding the value of sports. Now, our first argument is that through super teams, we can maximize the purpose of the sports industries by bringing more entertainment and more income. Now, the sport industry's primary purpose is to attract more viewers, to present an enjoyable experience for sports lovers, and to bring more people into the realm of sports to teach them how enjoyable it is. Now, super teams are like the cheat key to attract spectators, like fireflies to flame. People are generally the most interested in star players, like with the most spectacular plays and shows. And even if you're not interested in a particular sport, the general public, have usually heard of certain famous players. And so if they hear of the idea that they can see multiple of those players together, is very appealing. Like, oh, I know this player, but I know that player as well, but they're all together. Even if you're not interested in the sport originally, you'd like to go and see those games. Uh, now, and also, so it makes a very great event. And one of the important points that we want to mention now is that usually super teams tend to be temporary teams. So as the government mentioned, if they were permanent teams that stayed to monopolize all the industry, it could become a problem. But most of the times, whether it's in the NBA or the Premier League, super teams are actually just a way of regaining attention to bring more people into the industry. And so the government might worry about the super team getting monopolized, but their loyalty still lies in their original teams. But it can definitely bring attention to the industries and bring more fans into the sport. And more appreciators of the sport will be very beneficial to the industry as a whole. And most of all, it comes back to the normal players as well. We will explain this more in our third argument, but more money in the sports industry in the general means that there is more money and like a bigger budget and basic budget to spend on other players too. The less spectacular players will not be greatly harmed from this because they will also get more average support as their industry grows. So the benefits definitely outweighs the harms. And our second argument is that although the government said that super teams can harm the value of sport, we believe that aside from the industry, super teams also fundamentally upholds the intrinsic value of sports. As we explained, sports is fundamentally the art of honing out your abilities to see what extent human performance can reach and the sheer beauty that comes from it. And now super teams, we believe, by bringing in the most talented players out in one place, is like setting the stage to hone out our abilities to the finest. Because we want to see the best moves, the best performance, how incredibly people can use their own bodies. And sports is also about the joy that comes from appreciating that play, and how spectators will enjoy the show is also one of the key values of sports. Now, for the viewers, of course, it's incredibly beneficial because sports becomes so much enjoyable. Like with the spectacular plays and moves, it's going to be enjoyable. But and the sole excitement of seeing your favorite players on the field together. It's going to be like seeing an idol group with all your favorite members compiled together. And the government talked as if super teams will always win, and they usually do. But even if they don't win, the satisfaction that people get still exists. And they can actually get maximized when a team that everybody thought would lose wins against a super team. And so whether the super team wins or loses, it still brings amazing amounts of excitement and enjoyment for the people, which upholds the fundamental values of sports. And we also think one of the core values of sports is cooperation and teamwork. Now, even in normal teams, there are different members from different backgrounds and different teams, but super teams are an extended, accentuated version of that because there are the key members from all the usual strongest teams, and they have very different backgrounds compared to region and what type of roles they play in their team, and etc. And so, although they can have conflict at the start because they're all very star players, as they have to work together to hone their abilities, um, they will be able to see more accentuated plays of cooperation and teamwork happening inside the team. And so that would result in self-improvement as an individual player. And also, in general, it would be uplifting the values of sports as a whole. And so we believe that super teams, especially as a temporary stimulation, can definitely help the sports industry uphold the values of sports itself and bring the greatest amount of enjoyment and benefits to all stakeholders, the industry players and the spectators themselves. And I am very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Now, our opponent's case basically built on two assumptions, right? Firstly, super teams absolutely is a temporary team, and secondly, how people if they like, for example, the stars, they'll absolutely love the whole industry, and so far giving money to the industry, giving views to the industry, and how because there's too much stars in the super team, everything will just support the super teams anyways. So we want to deny this one by one, right? Firstly, characterization to super teams, right? We not really think that super teams is always temporary, right? It looks like how, for example, if you are extremely for example, if you're an extremely rich team, right, you are able to, for example, spend your money to hire those superstars inside to get inside your team, right? For example, in the NBA, right, it probably looks like you for example, say have a basically have a contract between other players, right? And if you are rich enough, you basically can basically hire majority of players and the best players in your team, and that's how super teams actually happens, right? Our opponent have basically they cannot just say that how oh super teams is only temporary, right? We tell that George without super teams and majority of the time is somehow permanent and long term, right? So we tell that basically did not take the uncharitable characterization our opponent give to us, right? And secondly, then we will tell you that George, what does super team look like, right? Super team actually looks like, for example, you basically take all of those core members from other teams and instead just make basically all of those members inside of one team, right? The other small teams, basically at first they might also be, for example, have some sort of support from the fans, will actually decrease their reputation, decrease their fame, and majority of the concentrations, either from fans, either from finances, either from leagues, all of them directly go through the only super team, right? It feels like everyone is only concentrating on the super teams, and every other team is only giving them, for example, some sort of reflection about how strong they are, how good they are, right? Judge, we tell that this is not really good things, right? Judge, what does our side look like, and why do we actually do it better, right? We tell that Judge, and our side it probably looks like how each team have their own unique characterization, how they have their unique benefits, how their unique strengths, right? For example, let's say in NBA, and you say that in Lakers, right? For example, they have LeBron James, which is extremely good, for example, and some sort of passing and 3 points and so on, right? Well, in other teams, they might actually have, for example, specific players that also add the, for example, characteristics to the team that make each team unique. But John, with a super team, it makes it basically takes all of those characteristics and the core spiritual members from each of the team and only concentrate it into one team, right? We tell that John, in short term, it might seem to be that those super teams might actually attract more people to watching them, but in long term, John, we tell that only having a team good it's not good enough, and it's never actually. Well, wait, later. So it's not gonna actually give them, for example, an overall good league, right? It probably looks like only a team, only a member of the league is good, right? It doesn't mean the whole league is good, anyways. So, Judge, when they talk about how they're actually enjoyable viewings and how basically to see the best player are getting balls, we tell that it might not always be, for example, it might not always be entertaining because, George, what truly makes sports that entertaining, what truly makes sport is because how tense they are, right? For example, the points are extremely close, or how people feel like the sport is extremely crucial, and they feel like both sides have the players they want, and they feel like it is an extremely competitive game that make them want to enjoy the game, right? However, George, if they always know that the team who's a super team always win, they never take any hope or any enjoyable scenes inside the game anyways, right? Because so far they feel like it is only always that one dominates the whole game while others just keep losing, right? Absolutely, it's not entertaining. You're just only see one side keep winning, right? Only compatible and only competitive games actually make you feel a sense of excitement, feel like sense of tense, feeling that how, you win maybe after a huge setbacks, or how you actually turn and flip the whole game and swipe the board, right? That is how it might actually make games have infinite possibilities, and how it actually give ways the basically spiritual of each of those sports that makes it everything could happen, that everything could actually also engage inside the sport, that every team have the possibilities of winning. And yes, your POI.
Even if not for super teams, there are teams that are better than the other, basically in the sports industry. Isn't it just natural for teams to want powerful players?
Without a judge, it actually have been really different, right? Because having a super team basically means that you have like a extremely dominant force, right? Having better teams doesn't mean you'll always win, right? But having a super team means that a majority of the time you are absolutely winning, right? Which our opponent basically said that in their speech. And secondly, then when we tell that why in ours, even if there's some sort of a better team, we tell they actually have in more engagement, right? Because better team also compete with another better team, right? That basically make it more competitive. For example, higher level of games and higher level of teams make those games, for example, more tense, right? But in super teams, that means that there's no teams as good as them, right? So it's how that even if you're, for example, a better team in the league, there's absolutely some teams similar to you, having similar condition to you, having similar strengths to you, right? Which make the game more competitive. However, with a super team, which is extremely different, you basically dominate the whole game. You basically have the core members from every single team. You're basically like there's no percentage of others winning you, and there's no team as good as you because super team is often just only one, right? And moving on, right? So when our opponent talk about how like the sport will be extremely exciting, I don't really see where does like excitement come from, right? For example, seeing a good basketball star doesn't just make the whole game exciting, right? What truly makes the game exciting is how it is compatible, right? And it's how basically both players are having extremely close in their scores, both players are trying their best in their games. That will truly make sports exciting, right? It's not only just a few people. And John, we tell you that the love in the specific player will actually be lasting, won't last for a long time, especially when super team basically when super team happens, right? Their last year, basically their shining characteristics, right? They basically last year also belongs partners from the original team, right? The spirit of the team basically just get lost, which basically makes the fans feel like unengaging, which overall directly break the whole industry. That which my part also talk about, right? And secondly, moving on to teamwork, right? I feel like the point of teamwork is actually pretty weird because George, notice how there's basically multiple players, multiple good players playing on the same position, right? And it's hard for you to say that, oh, if we take all of them together as a team, they will absolutely perform perfect teamwork. George, I think it is extremely unlikely where two players basically play the same position, and it's hard for them to actually truly have like a same teamwork with others, right? George, notice how individual strengths with others doesn't mean that the whole team will be better, right? Sometimes teamwork only emerge in specific teams, right? Only with specific partners, right? And that's why we tell that in our side, we give them a much better teamwork, giving them a more love to the team as a whole, but not just individual players, but as well to the whole team, to the whole league. Now that's how they gain more views. That's how they make the league more profiting. That's how they make the whole game more exciting. For all these and above, we are so proud to propose. Thank you so much for listening.
Judge, what the government side is overlooking is the fact that sports is not welfare, as we said. The sport industry doesn't have the duty to forcefully make the viewers watch at untalented sports players. So moving on to rebuttals. First layer of rebuttal. The government said that the new players do not get attention just because of the super teams. We think that this is not an inherent harm of the super team itself, but rather a natural law within society. Because in that, naturally, the talented people get more attention than less talented people. For example, in a corporation, you get more money and more praise when you're good at your job, and the same applies for sports. In fact, it is more believable that the merit part of the person should be even more prioritized in sports than corporation or any other industry, because the sports industry's primary purpose lies in attracting the interest from the viewers. And this is not only beneficial for the star players, but also beneficial for the talented players, like I will explain in the third argument. Second rebuttal. The government says that the super teams are only supported by a small number of fans because of the predictability. First of all, the results are not so obvious even when the super teams exist, as one may think, because a large part of sports come from other factors such as team chemistry and luck, like the government has also said, and this is why the people are still going to be willing to watch the sports, because the merit part of it is not the only thing that determines the results of the sports. In fact, we think that the super team part of it actually maximizes the amount of attention that the sport industry can get from the viewers when the team that is not a super team wins, because the attention from the viewers is all about the drama, and as the sport all about the drama, and the viewers will be invested in the sports if the team that they didn't think would win actually wins. And as the sport industry, if you can bring out this kind of drama and this kind of engagement from the viewers, why not do so? Second of all, the people don't watch sports only because of the results. It's more about the process of how a team wins. For example, the skills that the players use, the chemistry that the team players have with each other. This is why the government's arguments, if the government argument is true, it does not explain how people have different favorite players with each other. So if the government arguments are actually true, everyone's favorite athletes would be Michael Jordan, but that's not the case. And we think that the sports is about seeing the extent to which human physical ability they can get, and the unpredictability part, which is a goal that is more fulfilled on our team. Third of all, when the results are so obvious in the first place, we think that the sport industry will have no incentive to make the teams permanent, and because the people in the industry are not stupid, they would try every strategy to increase engagement from the viewers, which is why when there are super teams, the industry would naturally make it so that they are temporary and don't affect the engagement negatively in the long term. Third rebuttal. The third rebuttal is about the spirit of sports. So the government says that the purpose of sports is to be fair, right? But how is it not fair when the super teams are literally playing by the same rules and the same conditions with the non-super teams? The fact that the super team has the higher chance to win is because they actually have a better ability to play sports, and the entire point of the fairness in sports is that the teams that are more talented get the chance to win. And then they talk about unity, right? And saying that the fans will be broken down into pieces when there are super teams. Well, we tell you that if the fans are having conflicts with each other severely just because the team they cheer for is divided, we think that's a severe problem in their personal quality, and that the real unity that sports fans should pursue is the ability to be united and stay governed even when the fans root for loses. And this is the core value we should learn from sports, not that the sport industry should not make attempts to make a better team just because the public will be angry about it. Moving on to our team's third argument. Our team's third argument is about how super teams are beneficial for all players. So first of all, we prove that the sport industry is not welfare. So the fact that there are the more talented players are paid more is the nature of this industry, not a harm of the super team systems. There's no incentive, there's no reason that the sport industry should care about the players that don't earn money from it, because they're not forcing the players to stay in the sport industry. And the exclusion of the not so talented players, although we proved how it's not that big of an exclusion, is because the super team is temporary in the first place, is not a harm of this super team system, but the nature of this how this society works. For example, you can get fired from a company if you do not have the merit. But even if we assume that the sport industry should somehow care about how much their players earn, super team also impacts the mediocre players positively in the long term, because the super teams brings, first of all, money, and second of all, attention to the sport industries. First of all, the more money to the sport industry means that there is more money to spend on other players too. Because when the sport industries have more money to spend on sport, in general, they will not only give this to the star players, but also use this for many things that could benefit from people in the industry. For example, training new players or building new stadiums that the players can train on. And this is true because the industry actually have the incentives to care about their profit even after the star player's retirement. So they have to expand the industry as a whole, not just paying the talented player more. And even if the super teams are not temporary, by contributing to their industry and junior players, they can provide the grounds for better training and resources and etc. and increase the quality of the sports as a whole too. But second of all, super teams can bring attention to the industry, bringing more fans to the sport. We think that most of the sport players join the sport industry because they want the attention from the fans, and they like being praised for what they are good at. But this is only possible when the sport industry is receiving attention from the fans in the first place. But when the star players return to their original teams, with all the attention that they gather from the super team, the mediocre players will also benefit from that because the fans' attention go to the original team. And even if the teams are temporary, this is true. Third of all, the super teams can encourage both groups to improve as athletes because for those not in the team, this can be a benchmark for the players not in the super teams. And for those in the team, the super teams can be an opportunity for the star players to experience playing with better players and be an opportunity to be encouraged to improve themselves. This is why we are very proud to oppose.
Now, firstly, some clarifications. Note that our opponent is actually minimizing their own case. If the super team, for example, costing so much money to trade those new players, or for example, costing so much attention, our side don't see a reason why they, for example, will disable the team, but they can actually make so much profit, right? Secondly, even if, for example, they're actually making profit, very likely that this profit will be significantly less in the long term because our opponent said that they will cut those teams off. Therefore, I don't see our opponent's impact as big in any way because they keep minimizing their own case by, for example, the analysis you say that it will be only temporary for a very short amount of time, right? Our side don't see in the two-way side analysis why there is a reason except the fact that it is not effective, right? And secondly, moving on some clarifications, our opponent tried to say that very likely that what people actually want to watch is just, for example, the star teams, right? However, our side believes that it's very likely that what people actually want to watch is the competition between players that is tense, right? For example, where they don't know who is going to win when there's suspense, right? Where, for example, two similar teams that are both quite strong is fighting each other, and very likely that the fight is very intense, right? And very likely that what those fans want to look like is, for example, the cooperation in the teams. So because if it is very, for example, like if you put all the star players into one team, there are no suspense at all. There's no intense competition. What you will only see is you see one team beating up each other and the other team will never win, right? This will make the excitement of, for example, the audience to be much less for two reasons. Firstly, you never see any intense behavior, just one side beating each other up, right? It never makes you to feel very nervous, etc. Secondly, by the chance you know that this team is fighting the star team, you know that this team will win. There's no suspense in any ways, which makes people to have much less incentive to watch sports. Because the reason they watch sports is not because they want to watch someone beating each other up. From this, they can actually like watch some other things, right? What they're trying to watch is the intense competition and
POI.
cooperation between teams, with super teams have not provided. So what's your POI?
Even in original teams, there are teams that are better than each other, and spectators tend to watch because they want to see the moves and the process of the
Yeah.
game.
Firstly, our side believes that even if, for example, for those teams, there are strong teams and better teams, at least there are no super teams, right? Which is, for example, the first team and what it's like the best team that everyone thinks, right? Our side believes that even if, for example, there's some teams that are stronger than others, at least there's success. At least there's debate about even if this team is strong, will the other team win or not, right? However, super teams with everyone knowing that this team will win, there'll be no suspense. In our side of the house, even there are stronger teams, there will still be, for example, some suspense and some like there will still be, for example, some suspense and some debate about who will win or not, because everyone has their own understanding, right? However, with a super team of, for example, five of the most best players from the legend put together, I think that you don't need to think about who will actually win or not, right? Secondly, our side believes that it's very likely that there's no cooperation between players, as our second speaker had already mentioned. Therefore, it's very likely that even if, for example, you put those five super players into one, it's very likely that what they do, it is not to, for example, going to be a spectacle, right? It's very likely that because of the incorporation, this will just make the show to be worse to watch. Secondly, our side believes that we have already provided you an alternative to say that I don't see why, for example, they will put, for example, all of those super teams, all of those players into super teams, right? Our side believes that it's very likely that there's much more suspense and, for example, much more audience game if, for example, two super players are fighting each other, or two teams are as strong as fighting each other. Putting, for example, the best players and creating one super team, just for example, is not as effective as our side of the house, because our side has suspense and very likely that they will still come because, for example, the super players, right? The mechanism that you had mentioned before. And secondly, our side believes that our opponent says that it's very likely that they are going to be attracting outsiders. However, our side believes that I don't see why those outsiders will come, right? For example, if you're not interested in soccer at all, and you hear someone say that soccer is having, for example, a super team with a bunch of names that you don't even realize, our side don't see why you're going to come to this competition, right? You're not interested in it. There's there's no reason to come even if super players are coming together to form a team, right? Secondly, also I believe that it's very likely that the ones constantly watching sports is the most important, and those is, for example, is the audience that actually likes the suspense brought by the sports and the intense competition, not just one team beating each other up. Therefore, I believe that our side had already proven to you that firstly, it's very likely that it won't gain much attention and people won't like watch it. And secondly, we have a much more effective way is to say to make, for example, those players to fight each other, right? Or for example, to create some teams that are more equal to each other, just to make the suspense to be much more better. Secondly, our opponent tried to say that it's very likely that, oh, like for example, they're still playing by the same rules, right? Actually, this is false. It's very likely that because of the super teams have, for example, much more supports and much more sponsorship or etc., variously is huge likely that they're going to win, and it's very likely that this doesn't make sense to be fair because whoever created this team is going to be super rich. However, for the small teams that does not have much more money, this is actually a very big disadvantage, right? Secondly, our side believes that even if they lose, it's very likely that, for example, the media or the sponsors will still make them to look like, oh, the other team won by cheating, or they still won by, for example, but they still and for example, to make them to think like they still won and the other team is cheating, right? This is actually a more unfair advantage. Certainly, it is not uncommon to, for example, to have a referee on the super team side, and very likely that, for example, those sponsors have much more, for example, resources than before, right? Therefore, our side believes that it's very likely that it undermines the basic fairness of sports. Even if our opponents say that sports isn't, for example, to make those people able to watch bad teams fight each other, our side believes that we can have much more effective ways than that, than to making, for example, teams to fight unfairly to those super teams, right? Which I have already mentioned for 2 times. Therefore, I believe that our side should win on the fearless clash. Now, moving on to some clashes. Firstly, on the profit. Our fan tried to claim that this will gain profit. However, our side believes that there's absolutely no suspense on your side of the house, right? You're going to know who's going to win. Secondly, our side believes that there's much more teamwork. And thirdly, I already provide you a trend to say, for example, those teams are fighting other, or for example, those teams, for example, who has like the equal strength or power of each other fighting, this is just going to gain much more attention than before, and it's much more sustainable, as we are likely that there's not a huge disadvantage on any side of the house, right? Secondly, our side believes that we have already proven to you that it's very likely that for those outsiders, they won't come, and it's very likely that for those insiders, they won't want to watch those super teams. So because we win on this clash and we win on this debate, thank you very
So going into this debate, I'm the opposition whip, and therefore going to provide 2 clash points, and in the middle, I'll take a POI and prove how all the fallacies from the proposition side result from our side, being the opposition side, claiming the victory. So the first clash is on which side better fulfills the purpose of sports, right? So we would like to tell you that we don't deny that super teams are more likely to always win as opposed to those teams who have less talented players and would get more support. And also, we do not deny that there would be limited opportunities happening if that is the case. But however, until that is the point where we do agree. But the point that they made, where there will be less players due to difficulties of cracking into those super teams or facing those super teams, and therefore would damage the overall industry as a whole, we disagree to that because that is only under the case where a single dominant force is present as a team, or B, super teams are permanent, just like they say in their second constructive speech, and as opposed to being temporary, right? Oh, okay, but we would like to tell you that it is not true, and I'll later further explain that within my speech. So, in your examples, you like to talk
much.
about the
POI.
I'll also talk about I'll take that later. I'll also talk about some basketball. So super teams usually form under unique or special occasions, and also they are temporarily made. For example, the 1992 U.S. Men's Olympic basketball team called the Dream Team had Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and all those extremely talented players coming into one team. But however, due to all the balance matching and all the and it being a special occasion, we can see that it's usually a temporary thing as opposed to being permanent, right? And also, what they try to say is that they try to tell you that they want justice and fairness for the purpose of the sport, but the sports industries are not stupid. They're doing it because it's proven to be beneficial to economically, and they can profit from it. And also, they do not mention the fact that entertainment being a very big purpose within the sports itself and for the sports industry is important. And of course, these people in the industries are doing this because they know for a fact that it's going to be economically beneficial and at the same time gonna be a good time for the fans in terms of spectators, which means the entertainment comes as a bonus and everything is gonna go fine. And also, they talk about the gambling industry getting involved and they're gonna get struck as well alongside the sports industry. But however, we do not think that will lead to and therefore lead to significant issues, for example, like unemployment. However, we do not believe that this will happen under the same reasoning because just like we told you earlier, the monopolizing trades do not happen in reality, and most of the times, rather than being permanent, it's always temporary. So therefore, it's not. It also can be proven by the same points. As opposed to that, what do our leader of
POI.
opposition give you? Our leader of opposition not only tries to talk about the purpose of sports itself, which you try to do, but we also give you the purpose of the sports industries as well. Their industries, we want to talk about how they try to attract the spectators. So we try by explaining that because since super teams are temporary, people will stay loyal to their team and not harming anyone in terms of
Aw.
people, both for the players and the people in the industry, right? But however, saying that they have never dealt with this within their speeches, we believe that it's a thing that we can win, and therefore Clash 1 comes to us. And before moving on to the second clash, I'll take a PY.
Could you please give us a mechanism why super teams are always temporary? You never give us like this link.
We never give you that super teams are always temporary. We believe that there are more occasions where it's special and therefore it becomes a temporary team created. And for the most part, where you talk about the monopolizing situation, I was trying to say that further in my second clash. So in the second clash, we're trying to present to you which side gives to you a world where more stakeholders benefit from this policy, right? So what they try to tell you is that the rich teams are able to hire superstars, and they give examples again about NBA, and that not all super teams are temporary when teams are rich, right? So now, I'll give you the long-awaited explanation to what your pre-OI was asking and before and so on and so forth, because there are multiple teams that are rich. That is the reality that we're living in, right? There is not a single force or a team so rich that they would monopolize and completely sweep away all the good players within their own team, which is one. That's not the case that we're living in, right? So distribution is inevitable because there are so many rich teams. There are a lot of people with a lot of money, and believe it or not, that's a fact, and that is the premise that we're living in, right? So there being a lot of rich teams and also a lot of very talented players obviously leads to a distribution, and this, without me explaining, it's an obvious common sense within this world. Even if we watch a single sport, we can see that, right? So they also talk about how all the focuses will lead to the super team and it wouldn't be beneficial and it would be rather harmful, and that each team would have their own uniqueness in the propositions world where every player is kind of distributed more. But however, we would like to tell you that propositions claims as though there's one or close to a single team only that would monopolize the entire industry, and they try to give you a sense of reality, but we do that for you instead by telling you that there are a lot of rich teams capable of doing that, and repetition was inevitable due to their repetition as well. So the further explanation where they talk about the industry for sports being not being as enjoyable in opposition's case does not stand due to the same reasons of the foundations being crashed in their side and collapsing as well. So what the deputy leader of opposition is giving you has a further extent, but before talking about that, I want to present to you that the proposition side overlooks the ability of sports industries, just like they believe the superstars would do their profession and win those matches, right? So just like the superstars would do their work and win the matches, industries would also do their profession to win the fans' hearts, right? So the proposition only believes and only emphasizes that the players would be the sole cause of 100% of the outcomes where the sports would be timid or they would not be interesting and that would be predictable. But however, we find that fallacy where they don't talk about the purpose of the sports industries as well and don't further elaborate on that, which I've previously explained also in my first clash too. So I'll wrap up by telling you that super teams positive influence is always there too, because both the talented and the mediocre would benefit from this because the stars bring more money to the industries, and that's an inevitable fact that you cannot deny. And by this, there's a distribution happening that is a way bigger expansion, right? So rather than having a same amount or an extent of largeness in terms of the industry also expands with this huge development in terms of bringing more money into the industry. And therefore, alongside mediocre players gaining those hyper motivation by looking at those super teams, they will also get more distributed from the industries and get more money and more support inevitably, even if that's much less than the superstars. But that is also inevitable because it is a fact that more talented people get more attention as well. And therefore, by all those clashes, we win this debate as well. Thank you.
So, Judge, government team loses because they don't prove, one, why the sport industry would work in the way that they assume, and two, why the harms they try to prove are actual harms that are feasible. So the debate boils down to two clashes. First of all, how would the sport industry manage the super teams? So whether the teams would be able to earn profit, we think that whether the teams would be able to earn profit from making permanent super teams shouldn't be this debate's main concern. So the government side gave us this POI about they wanted us to give them the mechanism why the teams will be temporary in every situation. But we never told you that the teams would be always temporary. We continuously tell you that when the industry makes a super teams, they would not necessarily make it temporary, but they will do so in a way that will bring maximum amount of engagement from the viewers. But this will mostly look like the teams being temporary due to the harms of the team being permanent, like the government side has mentioned. Also, the super teams are hard to manage because each of those superstars are very expensive to keep, and they can have better treatment in their own teams as they are the top players in their home, and the regional feelings that they get from the super teams, etc. There are many reasons as to why the industry would be naturally inclined to making the super teams not permanent and temporary in the first place. And we believe that this being proven, the government's harms are only true under the premise that the teams are permanent and persist long enough for people to stop being interested in Denzel Curry, which is probably not the case in most of the cases. And the motion also said that the super teams have done more harm than good. We see no examples and no reasons as to why the industry will make the super team permanent. Especially there's no example from the government on what super teams were actually unsuccessful in the history, since most of the examples that they give us are actually extremely successful teams that are super teams. So the government's burden of proof was to prove why this is a harm why the harms that they try to prove are actually feasible when the industry are actually having the natural inclination to make the super teams not permanent and profitable in the first place. Second of all, they keep trying to prove that what the fans only want is competition between two similar teams. That is true, but that might have suspense, but the sports ground is much more diverse than they think. Spectators also enjoy the sheer joy of watching spectacular moves and skills, watching them play. Sometimes they just like seeing famous players and their favorite player. Second, the clash was why the harms they try to prove are actual harms. We continuously tell you that the harms that the government is trying to prove is not a harm because it's not the industry's duty to force the viewers to look at players they don't like. So in this clash, the government's burden of proof was to prove why the industries have the duty to force viewers to look at certain players, which is never engaged in the government side. So the only thing they say, the new players would not get attention. We tell you that that is not a harm because most of the times it's beneficial for the people in the sport industry as a whole. As opposed to that, we give a concrete reason why this is true. This is possible because there's attention and the money that the star players get from playing in the super team, and this leads to attention for the individual players and that are mediocre too. And also this is probable because the sport industry has the incentive to care about expanding the industry with the attention and the money that they gained from the super teams. So to sum up, we think that our team wins this debate because we tell you why the harms that we have concrete examples as to why the harms we say are actual harms, and we actually have more stakeholders. First of all, the viewers, we care about the viewers' entertainment. Second of all, we care about how this is good for the star players. Third of all, why this is good for actually the mediocre players, while the government only cares about the mediocre players. Very proud to oppose.
Opposition side lost the debate is because they basically assume that every people will watch every single games, even if they only care for the super teams. Judge, notice how there's multiple teams in the league, and when there is a super teams, there'll only be people watching the super teams, while on the other hand, other teams will never be able to be watched, right? We'll also notice how, Judge, that those super teams only take minority or at least not the majority of the games of the whole league, right? So we thought that only partial of the games are being noticed, and only those, for example, those super teams, their actions, their winnings, protect the time, their winnings will actually be recognized, and only their games will actually be focused. Then what's the harm here is that and not only diminish all of the viewings, all of the supports, all of the fans from other teams, and actually only having to only one it only happens into only one team, right? So it's hard to judge. This is extremely not beneficial overall. Now, firstly, George, I want to give an incentive analysis about what does the industry want to look like, right? What is the purpose of doing that? And secondly, move on to weighting, right? Firstly, George, incentive analysis. So when our opponents say that industry will know when they are maximizing the profits, when they are maximizing the views. But George, notice what is the purpose of the industry, right? They're greedy, they're revenues. They want to earn money, right? So when they see that how super teams are giving them profits, they want to maintain it. They want to keep the super teams, keep them for having the views, right? And that's why that then it turns out not to be temporary and become long lasting and it become long term, which achieve all of the single harms that we talk about. Sure, we thought that all stars might exist, but the importance of new stars, new players, new fresh into the game and into the industry is also extremely crucial, Judge. Because Judge, once those old players, after for example, a few years after they end their careers, they most need the rise of new stars. And when they're only caring about the super teams, Judge, we thought that those new players have no space of showing their talents, right? The new players are not able to, for example, gain support from other fans overall. Then, Judge, moving on to weighing, right? So why do we overweight than our opponents, right? Judge, what does our opponents look like? It is true that how people want to see talented people, right? It is also true that how people love superstars. And it is also true that how there will be more views in the superstar teams. But Judge, our opponent basically ignore every single other small teams, right? Which is the majority of the whole league. Judge, there are absolutely be richer teams. Yes, that is true. But Judge, we thought there's multiple bigger teams, which actually takes, for example, a bigger part of the league, which give them a more competitive games that those viewers truly want, that those viewers truly engage with, right? Judge, when the talent is having been evenly distributed, each team have a chance of winning, and that's when new players come inside to show their talents, and furthermore have a new rise in the stars, which actually furthermore outweigh our opponents, as we gain more fans, we gain more viewers, as we show new talents, we show furthermore new sort of characteristics of the team of the league. Okay, then moving on, right? So we talk that the reason why we overrate is mainly, and let's firstly talk about the industry, right? We thought that we actually give you much more profits and much more views because we give you some sort of new players, right? And secondly, we also prevent you from those viewers always being boring and always be bored by seeing those same talent and same stars having the same games and being tiring about how the super teams are always winning, right? And we tell you that, Judge, it probably looks like in their side as how people only watch the super team games or ignore other teams, which they furthermore with less support, they got less financial support, less likely to hire more talents, which is a really basically really bad cycle, which ending up super team getting more support, getting better and getting better while other teams getting ignored. And once it turns out to be some sort of extent, it turns out that those others basically the viewers also get bored and they feel like the league is basically not really interested in it because they never see any sort of high quality competition that they want to see as the viewers. So for all these above, we're so proud to propose. Well, first I got. Thank you so much.